and welcome back to the MMA India show. This is your host, Parvin Dabas, and MMA journal, Akhilesh Gannavarapu. We have just interviewed a UFC and MMA legend, Frank Mir, and without saying much, we will first let you enjoy the interview with the very articulate and cool Frank Mir. Here it is. So, just to start with, your early training at your father's gym, you trained in American Kempo. How was the environment? Training around martial arts, and of course, you were into multi-sports, not just into martial arts, but wrestling and American football as well. So we're guessing your childhood was mostly about sports.
Very much so, but I mean, my dad raised me very much about, I think as a martial arts, it's always been about combat. How to fight somebody else, basically, right? And then on the surface, that's what my whole career and my life's always been about. But in turn, that's always taught me, basically, I'm always battling myself, because that's the one factor that's always the same. Whether it's a wrestling match, whether we're playing badminton, whether we're playing chess, it's me kind of versus myself and my strengths, my weaknesses, and then against my opponent, and how well I can put those together. So my life's always been that of a martial artist. I was lucky enough that I found out a way to get paid how to do it also.
Great. Now, can you tell us a little about your meeting with Joe Silva, which kind of changed your career, of course?
Yeah, Joe Silva actually came into the gym, was this now 16, 17 years ago, or 2000, 2001, or 2000. And the guy came in on a 10-speed bike, which in the U.S., people don't take bikes anywhere. That's very weird. In the morning, you might see them at 6 in the morning on your way to work, exercising. But for the most part, everybody, drives a car. Yeah. And so here we have this guy comes in, and he sits there and he's talking, and we start, other people start talking to find out that he's the vice president of the UFC, who just rode up on a 10-speed. So no one believed him. This is before we could all just pick up our smartphones and Google him. Yeah. And so he was trained. It was very impressed with my ability to move like a lighter guy. And I think that comes from my martial arts background. Because karate with my father, I never tried to be the bigger, stronger person, just because I never thought that would be a solid factor that would stay continuous throughout all my matches. I would never always be the stronger guy when I fought people. But if I could be the more clever one, that's something I could try to accumulate. And so I also did jiu-jitsu that way. And so I think when he saw me, he had said that if I had gotten a few fights, that they'd possibly be interested in having me in the UFC. So at that point, I went and fought 2 professional fights. I never had an amateur career in MMA. And I won both of them. And then someone got hurt. So they gave me on 30 days notice. They asked me if I would come and take the fight, and I did. And that was Roberto Travin, and he was a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and I was pretty much not expected to win. And I not only a black belt, but a 4-time world champion, I think, at the time. I broke his arm in about a minute, and the rest has been history.
Right, and I have a question here, because you just said that you were never the bigger guy. It was just you using your wits to kind of get the upper hand. So how did that translate to you being a wrestler? Because being a wrestler is all about, having the size advantage, having the ability to take your opponents to the ground and just grind them. So how did that translate to you becoming a wrestler?
Actually, well, because my grappling is much more submission-based. I don't try to just take people down and grind them. I have the most finishes in the UFC heavyweight history between knockouts and submissions, because I'm not looking just to pin someone to the mat. I've won very few decisions. Almost all my wins, I win definitively. Either I break someone's arm, I choke them, or I knock them out. Because I think that's what martial arts should be, is trying to checkmate your opponent, not fight them to a stall, where it's just like, well, it's a draw. We kind of, you took more pieces than I took. And I never saw really the advantage of how that carried over to a real life situation. And not even just a street fight, but life itself. I don't think any issue in life you should be looking just to grind it out and just barely survive. Whether it's a meeting at work, it's a date with a beautiful woman, you should be looking to try to to succeed, to conquer, to go in there and and put your flag on the map that I was here, not just barely droll out a decision.
Right, and the other impressive thing is you were one of the earlier heavyweights. When UFC just exploded, or even before UFC exploded and came onto the scene. As you said, you started fighting in 2000, 2001, and then you made your way into the UFC. So, can you tell us a bit about how UFC was back then? Because we know the global juggernaut that it is today. But what were your experiences like when you just came into the UFC back when people did not even know what UFC was?
Well, it was different for us in the U.S. because other cultures like Japan, India, have a route where martial arts is respected and has traditional backgrounds. The U.S. back then, we had traditional martial arts, but they were imported. They came from China, from Japan. And so the problem was that when we were fighting, because of the early marketing, the first couple fights, it was a cage, 2 men enter, 1 man leave. This was the type of terminology was used. So we weren't really widely accepted. And in fact, when I was a professional fighter in the UFC in 2001, I barely had I actually met my wife, started dating her, and then had my first UFC fight professionally. And when I first told her what I did, she thought I was an aerobics kickboxing instructor. She had no idea what it was. And then when she actually told some of her friends that what I did, and they tried to tell her what I did, they were like, "You need to get rid of the guy. He's crazy. He fights in cages. The guy. They break bones. They try to kill each other. I think there's no rules. They try to kill each other." There was a lot of misconceptions when I first started. I was like, well, no, this is a martial arts. In fact, the joke was that my wife came out to my second professional fight when I fought Pete Williams. And afterwards, she calls me up. We're going to meet up to go hang out after the fight. And she canceled on me because she was going to break up because she thought I was too violent. And now everybody knows us. If the cops are at our house, they're there to rescue me. They're not there for her. Yeah. So there was a lot of misconceptions very early on, a lot of stigma around us. And people, again, if you were, in normal barroom conversation, it wasn't socially accepted to tell people that you were a professional fighter. You were kind of looked on with a lot of stigma. And then I think in 2004, the UFC started turning around. That was when we had a fight with Stephen Bonner and Forrest Griffin. Yeah. And that fight was on regular, on cable television, not a pay-per-view fight, but on the Spike television. And that blew up. And then it got to the point where I would be at a grocery store, at a gas station, and people started recognizing me and knowing who I was. Before that, I could go anywhere, and very few hardcore fans would know who I was, but I could go, to Disneyland and go there the whole day and not one person pulled me to the side. Now, I can't go to the restroom without. I just took pictures in the bathroom here at the River Spirit Hotel. The sport's so much more mainstream now, and so it's interesting. I don't think most athletes will ever get to experience what some of us have experienced in the MMA. Starting out with basically be like baseball in the 1910, all the way up to modern era. Who lives through that? Well, I basically have lived through our sport being at the smallest level, all the way up to now, to where we're on ESPN, Sports Center. Our fights are covered internationally around the world.
Yeah, just as an aside, we in India also saw that fight between Stephen Bonner and Forrest Griffin. And it's also one of the ways a lot of the fans in India got into the UFC.
It was a phenomenal fight. It really, I think that fight's going to go down in history as one of the fights that really made mixed martial arts what it is today. Whether we're talking Pride, Bellator, World Series of Fighting, ACB, you name it. Everybody kind of owes it to those two guys, not just the UFC, but to Stephen Bonner and Forrest Griffin for really turning a lot of people on.
Yeah. Now, you've spoken about being grateful for the motorcycle accident that you were in, that paused, let's say, your career for a bit. Now, can you explain that statement a bit?
Yeah, because especially in the U.S., we overvalue talent. We think it's more important than hard work. And I was what's the word I'm looking for? An outcome of that thought process. And so I was extremely talented at a very young age. I've always had a very good IQ for sports, at physical movement. I took a dance class with my wife, and within half a day, I'm doing the dance moves, and she's looking at me. I'm like, the dancer's like, hey, if you dance before, I'm like, well, no, but if I see you do it, I can do it. And so I've always had a very good ability to see something and mimic it and understand things. And so before that, I think because it came so easy to me that I worked hard as a teenager because I wanted it and I was always the young guy. But then all of a sudden, when I got into my 20s, I was strong, big, athletic, and just had my way with everybody in the gym. And so I think it kind of killed my work ethic. It made it to where it's kind of like being the smartest kid in class. It's kind of hard sometimes to still study. You might become a victim of your own success. And so when I broke my leg, all that was taken away from me for a while. So for a year and a half, 2 years, I struggled with pain in my leg, with ability to work out. And so I had to no longer just say, hey, I can do it tomorrow. It's like, well, no, I have to do it today. I have to work hard. I have to be focused. And so it really, once then my body healed, I became a good athlete again. But then I acquired all through the hardships of my injury, I acquired a much stronger work ethic, which now I get to pass on to my children because if you ask me right now, if you have a young fighter, you want me to train him, and you say, hey, he's extremely talented, but he doesn't work that well. All right. Or you tell me a guy that is not that talented, but he's going to do everything I ask him to do, and he's going to work hard, I'll take that guy any day of the week.
Right, and even before your accident, you had won the UFC Heavyweight Championship after your fight with Tim Sylvia, and even before that, you had fought Tank Abbott. So, can you also tell us about your experiences and just the emotions that you went through when you won your fight against Tim Sylvia?
Actually, the Tim Sylvia fight was emotionally very much of a letdown. If anybody goes back and watches the fight, it was a very short fight. It lasted less than a minute. Right. And broke his arm. And right. Because the referee, Herb Dean, stopped the fight because he saw his arm break. But then there was confusion whether his arm was really broken. And obviously they're not going to bring an x-ray machine into the octagon and try to find out is it broken or not. And so they ended the fight. And people were booing. They were upset. They didn't understand what had happened. Even so much to the point where, again, it's something, I think it's the only time that Bruce Buffer's ever made this mistake. But when he announced me as the winner, he didn't even announce me as the champion because there was so much confusion after the fight. Well, then afterwards, I'm in the back, and it's kind of upsetting. Here, accumulation of all this effort going towards becoming a champion, and it's kind of like, well, you kind of won, but you kind of didn't. It was a mistake. You shouldn't have won the fight. And it was not very satisfying. And so the only thing good that night came about was that my instructors, Ricardo Perez and Sergio Pena, gave me my black belt in jiu-jitsu. So people always ask me that. So I trained for 4 years, became a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and had to break the heavyweight champion of the world's arm. And so funny part of it was, it kind of looked bad, was that when we were inside the post-fight news conference, I'm sitting there and I'm still kind of upset about how this whole situation's arose. Basically, it's like, yeah, you won, but we don't really think you won. It's kind of the energy that I'm receiving from the media. So then Dana White gets up on the podium and he announces that, hey, Tim Sylvia is going to be fine, but he's at the UMC right now, or the Valley Hospital, I believe. And his arm is broken in 3 different places. They're actually going to have to do surgery. It was a good stoppage on Herb Dean's part. Frank Mir legitimately won the fight. And so then my family was in the back, and there was 20 people there. All start cheering. And some of the people thought it was barbaric, and I had to always explain. I'm like, no. They weren't cheering that his arm was broken. No. But they were with me in the locker room, and everybody was sad. Here I have a title. No one's happy. we're all upset because we think it's a bad stoppage. So they were cheering that it was a legitimate win, not that someone got their arm broken. But so that was how that fight had carried out.
Right, and it was also during the same time when UFC exploded onto the national scene with the whole Bonner Griffin fight, as you said, after the first edition of TUF. So being in that spotlight just when the sport had exploded onto the national scene, what changes did you go through this transition where you went from relative obscurity, you as in the sport went from relative obscurity to coming onto the national stage? How was this transition for you?
It was very difficult at first, just because there really was no training for it. I think that people become professional football players, soccer player, basketball player. They have a players' association. They have unions. They have former players that will come in, talk to the club, and take guys under their wing, explain to them, hey, how it's going to be to now be exposed to fame, to be exposed to money, to have the attention that you're about to receive. We had none of that. We had nobody in our sport was that kind of famous like the UFC was becoming. So we really didn't have, we had our heroes like a Hoist Gracie, a Ken Shamrock, guys that were big amongst us, but they themselves were not famous on an international or national level. And so a lot of it was trial and error, us figuring it out. And so it's been a learning curve, learning that people don't understand that you. The hardest thing that was for me to adapt to is that, and I explain this to people, is that everybody else gets to clock out. Whether you're a journalist, you're a firefighter, you're a doctor, there are moments where you're not working anymore. As an entertainer, anybody in the public eye, whether you're a politician or professional fighter, professional athlete, anybody like on our level, the minute I walk out my hotel room door, I'm working. If I go down to go get a bucket of ice, I clock in. So if someone speaks to me or says, hey, I can't sit there and go, hey, man, I don't want to talk right now. I don't want to sign autographs. I don't want to take pictures. I'm with my kids. I'm with my wife. I'm on a date. I've had times where me and the wife are not getting along. We're in public and we're having a heated conversation. People walk up, hey, are you Frank Mir? And I have to stop. Hold on. Hey, yeah, no, how's it going? Smile. Hey, shake hands, take a picture. Good. Go back. Okay, now look, this is what I think. I have to argue with my wife, like any other married man would probably doing. And so that was the hardest part, because no one really told us that. And you couldn't complain about it. You just have to understand that's the way it is. The minute you become any kind of notoriety on television, like how we are as fighters, there are no days off.
Right. And, inherently from the beginning, do you think there was this stigma that was attached to fighting? As you said, the fighters were associated as brutal, just these guys who just fight inside a cage. So how do you think that has changed, the perspective in people's eyes? How do you think that has changed over time?
Well, I think that there's still a little bit of an awe over somebody who's willing to walk in and fight something, because, socially, it's people are afraid of fighting. I mean, it's natural human. Our psyche is to avoid confrontation. Right. As a caveman, if we saw a lion down in the valley, the idea was to try to stay away from the lion.
Right.
Most guys that are professional fighters, we're the type of person that's going to get a stick and probably go poke the lion and see what he can do. So people sometimes have a hard time wrapping their brain around people that are able to fight, because it scares them. And so that, I think, creates a little bit of a stigma. I think we've gotten over a lot of the negative incantations over our sport, because, no group of people are innocent. I don't care. We can go again. Police officers, hey, they're great. They help society. I can find a few bad ones. Doctors,
right.
You know what? I can find a few bad ones. I don't care. Politicians, you can have 100 politicians and 99 of them are great. One of them is going to be a bad person.
Well, the politician thing might be a little more, but yeah.
I don't want to make anybody mad. Let's just I'm being political.
Yeah.
But, for the most part, they're always going to have your bad apples. But I think that, when people realize that it isn't that, the MMA, mixed martial arts, we're not filled with bad apples. Do we have our occasional fighter that ends up in the news because he did something wrong? Yeah, it happens. but I think that they see that, there's, hundreds, if not thousands of professional fighters in all the different organizations, and we're not any more in trouble. We're not any more aggressive than the professional football players, soccer players, hockey players. We're men like anybody else, and women now. And, do a few of us make mistakes? Yeah, but I think so now that they see us all the time, and I think the reality shows that have been out there with both, Bellator and the UFC has done, it's helped erase a lot of that stigma. And I think also, too, social media has really helped us out. You and I, we're right now on Skype able to do an interview. People can sit and listen and hear me speak. Where, 10 years ago, there wasn't Twitter, Facebook's just starting off. So I think there was a disconnection between the fighters and the fans. And now, because our sport has really embraced that, more so than some other sports. You see a lot of other mainstream sports, they ban their athletes from being on social media. So they create more of a barrier. If you guys wanted to do an interview with a professional basketball player that's in the Hall of Fame, how many people would you have had to spoke to before you get to him? There'd be layers of, okay, let me talk to his agent, let me talk to the manager, let me talk to his assistant, let me set it up. Most of the fighters, here I'm in the Hall of Fame, you guys called one person, now you're talking to me.
Right.
It's much than I think the fighters, and I think that's allowed us to be more approachable, and people relate to us so much easier.
Right.
Now, this is kind of two questions rolled into one. You recently spoke about a desire to fight Brock Lesnar again, like a trilogy fight. But of course, that seems to be off the table now, with him retiring from MMA. At least he has said that right now.
Not his first.
Sorry?
Not his first time retiring, so we'll see.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. So he's saying it for now. Now, you did, of course, fight Andrei Arlovski, which a lot of people thought you won. So do you think now is a good time for that rematch?
It could be, if it makes sense and people want it. I really like to go out there and fight because each time, that's what I do every day. Today I got to the hotel room. There was something I wanted to work on as a martial artist, whether it's a certain stretch, whether it could be just an exercise, a combination of hand movements. Every day I like to train. I like to do something that pushes me and makes me a better person. I was just reading a book on nonverbal communication, how to read people and what people are signaling, and that's just me always constantly sculpting myself. What fighting is to me is kind of like taking an exam for a student at school. You can study all you want and train your mind, but don't you want to see where you are? Do you want to see how well you're retaining the knowledge? So that when you get that exam, if you get a B on it, you're like, well, maybe I need to improve this, or what did I make a mistake at? What can I improve upon? And so that's what fighting is for me. It's never really been about gaining titles. It's never really been about who I fought. And making money, honestly, has always been a way that I can just tell my wife that, look, this pays for you to go here and drive this. So can I just go to the gym and hang out there all day? And so that's been, could you imagine if something you loved paid your wife and she left you alone, you got to do it all day long? That's kind of how it worked out for me as being a professional fighter. And so I really, honestly, the Brock Lesnar fight interests me because we're 1-1, and that's such a pivotal thing. I would really like to fight him again. Andrei Arlovski, it'd be nice to go back and redeem any of my losses, especially ones I felt that, I could have won. And maybe in that case, I think I did win. But, for the most part, I would just like to get in there and fight again and see how much more I've improved and how much more I can still improve.
Right. And, even before we kind of talk about Brock Lesnar's fight, you fought Nogueira, you fought Sheikh Congo, which were two of, some of the most prominent fights at that point in the heavyweight division. So just before, you called out Brock Lesnar after that, what among these three fights, which was, in your opinion, do you think was more pivotal at that point in your career?
Well, I think that because Brock is so famous, more people probably know who I am because of submitting him with a knee bar. But for me, the most impressive fights was fighting with Nogueira, because Nogueira at one time was the #1 fighter in the world. And ran into Fedor. He was a black belt in jiu-jitsu before I started jiu-jitsu. And so he was somebody I watched fighting for a title at Pride, even when I had just started my UFC career, was on prelims. So for me, fighting him and having a victory there was much more meaningful. And actually, he's the more dangerous guy for me to fight because, if Brock wins, he wins by ground and pound. I lost the fight. No, it matters. Every time I fought Nogueira, there was a chance that I could be submitted because he's a high-level jiu-jitsu. And that, to me, would have been much more crushing of a loss because that's what I'm best at is submissions. And so fighting, it's kind of like being the best sword fighter in the room. If you want to fight guns and you shoot me, hey, you won. The gun beat the sword today. But if I have to fight another sword fighter, now he's the better sword fighter. Do you see how the loss is kind of like that much harder to take?
Right. And, now we talk about your fight with Brock Lesnar. And at that point, at least, 5-6 years ago, that was the fight between Frank Mir and Brock Lesnar. So why do you think there was such animosity between you two? How did that even start? And what led to, what happened in your second fight? What was the lead up to all of that?
I think a lot of it was just we just come from two different worlds. I'm a martial artist, a much more moderate thinker, even liberal, according to his thought process. And I'm not a bully. And Brock he kind of is the opposite of all that. He's somebody that, is kind of the big guy, the bully, and that always rubbed me the wrong way. And so I think that he and I just kind of bug each other. I think that if, we walked into a bar, before the night's over, we fight each other because I don't like what he represents, he doesn't like what I represent. Ideologically, personality, pretty much everything that you can, think about what, your morals and your values, he and I pretty much stand on opposite ends of the table.
Right. And now we talk about, since you talked about, wanting to fight Lesnar again, you're in a predicament where, and this is something that we have seen with quite a few fighters. For some, for someone like John Jones or Brock Lesnar, you think, these guys are getting multiple chances or sometimes getting advantage that they don't deserve. But there are fighters, you talk about someone like Machida, you talk about, someone like yourself. What do you think is going on with USADA? Just what is your entire opinion about what has happened since USADA came in? Do you think the fighters at some point, at some level or the other, are being given different treatments by either the athletic commissions or the promotion? Just what is happening with the entire policy?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't see a lot of consistency behind it. But, that's the reason why USADA works with the UFC. Other major sports organizations, like, for example, American football, won't work with them because they don't really have a process of neutrality. Where, if you think about it, USADA is in the business of trying to just justify why they exist. They only make as somebody who goes out and tests people for drugs and finds things. And I see that they find a metabolite in my system, and they give me a 2-year ban suspension. And then 6 weeks before that, they had blood tested me and urine tested me, and my body was completely clean. So instead of trying to work with me and trying to figure out what else I could have came in contact with that would come up with this metabolite, which is not the steroid itself, but a metabolite of that could be. But if we learned from chemistry, from other things, there's such thing as a false positive.
Right.
You could have eaten something else or drank something else that resembles this. And we've seen it in other drug tests. Marijuana, there's certain things you can eat that can give a false positive. And over the years, people realize that, and they tell you, hey, don't eat this, don't take that, because it could give you a false positive. But some of this testing is so new.
The other thing that I also wanted to ask you was, you said USADA had told you that if you kind of said you had taken it, then there would be a reduced sentence or something along those lines.
But I never wanted to go down that path because then I'd be lying.
Right.
I didn't feel like confessing to a crime I didn't commit was worth getting a lesser sentence. I would rather, stick to the truth and know that I feel I can sleep at night and deal with a greater punishment. I think all the time people sometimes in the judicial system are faced with that. Sometimes they're asked to plead guilty to something maybe they didn't do because it looks bad, but in change, don't risk maybe a lengthy sentence that could happen. I went ahead and took my chances with the innocence, with telling the truth. So maybe I'll regret that when I get older, but it makes me feel better to go ahead and just, stick to what I know.
Right. And the other thing is, I also wanted to briefly touch upon TRT, testosterone replacement therapy, because a lot of people do not understand, at least in India, they do not understand the nuances why fighters go for TRT. Now, obviously, UFC has said that cannot happen, but can you also talk a little about why it is important for people, not just for fighters, and just what its importance is?
Well, no, TRT is not just for fighters to take. It's a medicinal or medical treatment for males. As we get older, we receive trauma to the brain. Our hormones can be put off, and so through TRT treatment, it's kind of like if you have asthma and you take an inhaler. Could you use an inhaler if you don't need if you didn't need it? Could it be a booster for your performance? It could be, but with TRT treatment, you're doing it with a doctor, and they're doing blood tests and they're regulating it. And so it's something that a lot of men here do as they get older and start, the ravages of time and living a hard life of sports could result of. And so the UFC in the past, or athletic commissions in the past, allowed, athletes, if they were taking any medicine from a doctor, to allow them to continue to take it as long as it wasn't looked at as a sports enhancement. And TRT really isn't. It's not going to, anybody doing TRT with a doctor, they're not all of a sudden going to go to the gym and double their bench press and be able to run twice as far. There's no miracle drug that does that. I guess there might be, but no one knows about that. And we're not allowed to take it. But it's no more, no more of an athletic performer than taking multivitamins and, taking the normal medication you're supposed to take from your doctor. Some people take cholesterol pills as they get older, and so that's pretty much what that was about.
Right. Now, the other question that I have is, before, as you said, the state levy commissions were kind of easy when it came down to TRTs. You just have to provide the doctor's certificate and you get an exemption. But with USADA in place, you kind of have to go through different hoops per se to get the exemption. So, did you try doing something like that, and what are the difficulties that USADA?
I did TRT treatment. When I first went to my doctor and I told them I wasn't feeling well, and they did a bunch of blood work on me, and there was different medications that they wanted to put me on, and then the TRT treatment was one of them that gets flagged by the athletic commission. Other ones, like taking, any kind of statins and whatnot, not so much, like a Crestor. No one cares about that. But so the TRT, so I had to go to the athletic commission, have them have their doctors look at all the paperwork. And what they started doing was that every 2 weeks they would have me get blood tested to make sure I wasn't abusing any of the treatments, taking too much of the medicine. Right now, everything's on the other side, to where USADA is trying so hard to make sure they can catch anything. Because bottom line is that if you have people that have money and they want to beat the drug tests, USADA is never going to catch them. I mean, look what just happened with the Olympics, the Russian team.
Right.
They even test the guys. They don't even know what they were taking. No one got tested positive. They just got information that people were trying to fake the drug test. And and they still don't know how to catch them. So then they put a blanket ban on everybody because there was no way. Because once again, I have a suspicion that the people that do the drug testing are also the same people that come out with all these new crazy drugs that are ahead of the drug testing. It's kind of like cops and robbers, right? They have this police scanner that'll laser tag and tell you how fast your car is going. So a guy makes one and he sells money, right? So everybody buys these laser guns that can, catch these guys that are speeding. Well, guess what that next inventor does? He goes out, now he sells a device that tells you when the radar gun is being used. So now, all of a sudden, now he could sell all these devices to block the radar gun. You know what's going to happen next? He's going to come out with a better radar gun. And he's going to keep jumping the fence on one side or the other. And that's really where drugs are in our world, is that the guys that come out with the drug testing, they're able to block it. They come out with a drug test, and then they're the ones that a year later will come out with a new drug, say, hey, everybody take this drug, and now I'm going to be a millionaire selling this drug to the different organizations and different people that have multi-millions of dollars invested in their athletes. And then when they're done buying that, or other people know how to mimic that drug, then I'm going to sell a test that catches that drug, and then I'll make a new drug, and then they just keep leapfrogging each other over and over again. The energy spent on fighters, I think, is kind of funny. It's one of those things, kind of like politics. Like, hey, look at this, so you don't pay attention to this. Even Conor McGregor, who's probably our richest fighter, he can't afford to have a doctor and a chemist on his payroll. There's a lot of governments out there and a lot of other big-time soccer teams, big-time rugby teams. They do afford to have that chemist that they can pay hundreds of thousands of, if not millions of dollars to be on the cutting edge of all this. The fighters, we don't make that kind of money.
Right now, then what is the most sensible way? Because you have two sides of the fence. You have one part of the section saying the sport needs to be clean. There needs to be some sort of policy that needs to be implemented. But then, as you said, there's the other side, which has this argument, saying how is that even possible? How is it possible to clean the sport 100%? Because that is just not going to happen. So how do you
reasonable?
Segregated?
I think it's reasonable oversight without being extreme. Like I think how the commissions had it before, when we just had the individual athletic commissions testing guys, people still got caught taking drugs if they tried to abuse them. But it didn't seem like it was as crazy as it is now, where a guy can't even take an IV bag to rehydrate.
Right.
3 months away from a fight, he can't even take an IV bag because there's a chance that people can manipulate that into cheating. There's drugs now that we can buy from the vitamin store that you and everybody else can take, but if I happen to take them and get drug tested, they could show up as positive drug tests or show some type of tampering. I think now what's happened is, and that seems to happen in life itself, kind of like how American politics, we've been going one direction for the last 8 years, and all of a sudden the pendulum's swinging really hard, and now we're going to go the other direction. But to me, I'm very much about moderation. I think in the middle. I think having the commission's drug test guys the nights of the fights and then coming and doing random drug tests is fine. This you can't take supplements from the store, or you're guilty till proven innocent, or the IV bag, and everything else is just too extreme. I think to the point to where they're so worried about catching the guys, it's actually hurting the guys that are still innocent and trying to do the right thing. And the few guys out there that are able to get away with it, they're never going to catch those guys anyways.
Right.
Now, can you tell us a little bit about your stint as a commentator now with the Absolute Championship Berkut, or ACB?
Yeah, I've been trying to make sure that I keep that going. I love being around martial arts, so I've been doing a lot of seminars and then doing broadcasting, doing color commentating. I do it primarily right now. The two organizations I do it for the most is the ACB, the Absolute Berkut Championships in Berkut. It's a Russian-based promotion, which is one of the best organizations. I mean, it's phenomenal fights. Some of the fighters there on par with anybody. Bellator, UFC, World Series of Fighting, some of their champions could easily be champions anywhere else. They give a run for everybody's money. So it's a great event, and I get to watch guys that are great martial artists, and I do that probably 12 to 18 times a year. And then the other show that I do that's a local show for the States is the XFN, Extreme Fight Night. And that's actually where I'm at, and I'll be broadcasting tomorrow night. And that's a tier level down than obviously UFC and Bellator. But a lot of their champions now are going to go off into Bellator. If they win, the tournaments here, they move off. So it's cool to be around guys that are in that middle level. They're not, famous like a Machida or a BJ Penn, but they're that next step going into the next league.
Now, also, you just spoke a little about politics. Now, if you check a lot of fighters' timelines, there are a lot of fighters who are giving their political views, both sides of the fence. Do you have any, political views on what's happening in America? Because, like you just said, the pendulum has swung the extreme opposite way, and a lot of people would say there is a certain kind of turmoil and churn happening in America. Now, do you have any public views for the same?
Yeah. I do, and I actually get to express them a lot. The other thing I do twice a week is I have a podcast called Phone Booth Fighter. My partner, Richard Hunter and I actually we talk about fighting, philosophy, religion, politics, all the things you're probably not supposed to talk about at a bar that we talk about. And so politics is one of them that because it affects all of us. I mean, you and I, all of us, my wife, my children, what's happening politically on a national level, a local level, international level. I mean, I was in Australia when Trump did the travel ban. And, US-born citizen, I'm not from one of the 7 areas that was put on the list, but, I was still, wow, okay, so what's going to happen when I come back over? It was concerning. And then, we have fighters that I know that are of Iranian background. I'm like, all right, what is this going to do to them? And then our ties I do because of the ACB. I'm in Russia quite a bit. So hearing what's going on between, the Putin and, and Trump is interesting. I have to kind of keep an ear out for it because, it concerns me directly more so than some people that never leave their backyard. I guess I'm a little upset with how politics are right now because terrorism is working. I guess that's all I can say about that. It's worked. The terrorists, to a certain point, are kind of winning more than I would like to acknowledge, I guess, or like to, to give them credit for. But I didn't realize until I seen, the fear that's happened in our country, where it's not necessarily founded yet. Like I think that in the U.S. that our allies are keeping a good eye on everybody. I guess I think the government was doing a pretty good job of keeping the bad guys away. Are there always going to be guys that succeed that are crazy and motivated? Well, yeah, man. That's what makes humans great. When we get motivated and we get our mind set on something, we're kind of hard to stop. But that being said, I mean, I don't think we had a terrorist attack in the U.S. that was from abroad. The last one I know of was 2001, and that was from a country that wasn't put on the ban list. About 15 of the guys on that plane aren't banned in their country. So that was kind of disturbing to me a little bit that, it's kind of like, well, damn, if we're going to do this, why are we not doing this to where it makes sense? And so everybody now is wanting to, get so worried. It's the point where, like, I travel so much. So I know the difference between somebody who's just a Sikh and somebody who's actually of Islam faith. Yeah. But most U.S. citizens, I shouldn't say most, a lot of U.S. citizens can't tell the difference. They'll see a guy and go, hey, what? I'm like, no, guy, the guy's a Sikh. We're completely different. We're not even in the same time zone, buddy. Yeah. I mean, you got to relax there, and but everybody's so paranoid. They see somebody with a little bit darker shade and we start freaking out. And do I think that we need to be alert? Well, yeah, but I think that it has to be intelligently formed. I think in life, I noticed that when I make decisions out of emotion, I tend to regret them afterwards. I tend to be, if I do it out of fear, out of lust, out of jealousy, out of anger, whenever I do anything and that's the motivating factor, I tend to regret it afterwards. Or it makes a really funny story I could talk about. And so I guess politically, that's one thing I'm kind of worried about right now is that, I first kind of, like I said, I'm in the middle. I'm not really real conservative. I'm not super liberal. I bounce back and forth. You name a topic, and sometimes I'm conservative, sometimes I'm liberal. It depends on what we're talking about. I don't really have a down the lane. I don't check all the boxes on one side or the other. But my partner is a very liberal guy, Richard. And he was positive that Trump was not going to win. And I remember you go back, you can listen to our podcast, and I'm like, hey, buddy, Brexit, Brexit occurred, and no one said that was going to happen either. Well, no, the polls, exit polls, like, well, here's the thing, and it actually came out true. People don't always tell the truth, especially if it's unfavorable when they walk out of an exit poll. After they're done polling, they walk out and they have some guy with a pad sitting there going, hey, so who did you, what did you think on this? People don't want to tell somebody else because sometimes, and that's both sides' fault. I can't sit there and say that one side is the victim and one side is the bad guy. I mean, if you have a conservative view at times in our country, you're labeled a misogynist, you're labeled a racist. It's like, well, wait a minute, if you try to bring up crime figures and go, well, larger than 80% of our jail population is African American. that is a loaded topic that we're not allowed to talk about. Especially, I'm not allowed to talk about it because I'm not African American. And if I started talking about that, people are like, well, that's racist. I'm like, no, no, it's a racial conversation. What I'm talking about is race, but I'm not knocking one. I'm just saying, hey, can we talk about this? But so we have a lot of things in our country that I think has been very divisive because both sides just seem to just, have a lot of emotional hatred for each other, and it just causes us to be very divided.
Right, and the other thing that you said was you travel a lot. You kind of get affected with all of this. The question that I wanted to ask you was, you commented before for WEC. Now you're doing with ACB, and you named it a promotion in the United States. So, and you said you like doing it because you like analyzing the fights.
Yeah.
So how do you think?
To be honest with you, I'm hoping you guys actually, if we ever have an ACB or you guys have some fights down there, maybe I could come down and commentate and teach and hang out, or maybe even fight there, because India and Japan are on my bucket list for places I would like to travel to.
Awesome.
Yeah, of course. So my question was, as a fighter, how do you think that helps you? How do you think that makes you a better fighter just by understanding the science?
Oh yeah, because you're seeing things in real time. Everybody can break out a chalkboard and write their X's and O's on what should happen. But then there's always the reality of what does happen. And there's always that little bit of misconnect because there's so many factors that really nobody is smart enough to encompass them all, to understand the psychology behind a fighter, the physiological makeup of the fighter, the dynamics of what's going on across the ring with the other opponent. There's so many factors that really no one's mastered all of them. I mean, I think it's an impossible feat. And then you have contrary opinions of what could work and what not work. So the fact that I get to sit there and watch fights, I get to analyze and see fighting. It'd be the same as, being a soccer player and watching game after game after game. You're going to pick things up. You're going to see things in action. You're around it so much more. And it's not like I'm sitting there having a beer with the family where I'm kind of watching the fight, kind of not. Which typically, if I'm home, that happens a lot. The kids start talking to me. I look over. We start talking. I miss. When I'm calling the fights, I'm there almost as much more as the cornermen are there because I'm watching every step that each guy is taking. I'm listening to what the cornermen are yelling. I'm trying to understand what's going on. And then I have to not only see what's going on, but I have to understand it so well that I can make it very simple and be able to convey that to our listeners that are listening to me commentate and break the fight down in a way that they understand that they don't have to be a world champion Hall of Fame fighter to get what I'm talking about. I'm trying to break it down in a ways that if your wife, your mother, your father-in-law who is an avid hater of MMA, thinks it's the worst thing ever, but he sits down to watch the fight with you, that those people could understand what's happening, why the fight's occurring.
Right, and I also have a couple of questions regarding the state of heavyweight division in the UFC because for the past 5-6 years we have seen the same contenders kind of fighting for the title in the top 5, but now you have two people in Derek Lewis and Francis Ngannou climbing that ladder. So why do you think it has taken so long for these younger fighters to step up?
I think that heavyweights typically mature later in life. You see most of the heavyweights, we don't really start getting really good, typically on average, so they're 35, 36 years old. You see some of the guys make some of the best runs in their career. And so I think that's just the way it is because it's such a skill-heavy sport that it takes years to acquire. And I still think that it's going to be, I would be shocked if Derek or Francis were in a title fight in the next 2 years. I still think they have a long way to go through a lot of guys that are extremely tough.
Okay, and one last question from me is, what do you think about Fedor Emelianenko finally coming back to the United States? Do you think that would help the heavyweights, help the sport in just growing even at a faster rate now that he's back in the United States?
I think it's a novelty for the hardcore fans. You guys that are into the sport know who Fedor is. I think for the average person right now that's a fan of MMA, I think the average person, if I say, hey, Conor McGregor, they know who Conor McGregor is. I say, hey, Holly Holmes, Ronda Rousey. Even if I say Cyborg, they know who I'm talking about. if I say, hey, Fedor Emelianenko, they're gonna raise their eyebrow and wonder who I'm talking about. And it's not a knock on Fedor. It's just that he hit the pinnacle of his career before, the MMA was what it was that it is today. He's kind of like, his greatest years were during the darker times of our sport as far as type of attention we received. And it was outside the States. It isn't like he was a Hoist Gracie who, yes, he made all his moves as a champion during the dark ages, but at least it happened here. Most of the guys, Fedor fought his whole career pretty much outside the U.S. lines. And so I think that also hurts him as far as notoriety. I think that really him and Matrione are probably equally famous. In fact, if I took them both to Walmart right now, Matt Matrione might be more recognizable. Yeah. And so that's why I don't know how much it's going to help out the division. Me personally, watching Fedor fight is a great thing because I'm a hardcore fan. But I don't know. I think he has a hard fight for him on Saturday because Mitrione's a real tall, long, athletic guy. But the thing about Fedor is he never quits. Even in the fight, he.
There you go.
The wife's trying to call me.
Okay.
So, a few more minutes, right?
Yep. Just a few.
Yeah. Just a couple of minutes.
Fedor's last fight, Maliano, he really lost the first round badly. In fact, I think that, after watching it, they could have stopped the fight. I don't think anybody would have argued. But instead of focusing on that, the part that really impressed me was that he came back and I think he edged out rounds 2 and 3. So, that still says something about him that he could get beat up that badly and still come back. So he still has that. So that's the part that still makes it towards a competitive fight because even if Mitrione is winning rounds 1, rounds 2, if Fedor is still fighting, I'm not going to really bet against him. I think that he can still pull it off.
Great. Now, before we sign off, do you have a message for your Indian fans? Because we do look forward to you coming here sometime, either as a fighter for a workshop, seminar, or as a commentator as well.
Well, no, actually, I hope that I have some fans out there that will create a demand or a need for me to be able to travel out there because I'm super excited about possibly going there, going to New Delhi or Bangladesh and hanging out and just immersing myself in the culture. Because that's one thing I guess that I kind of have coming from the U.S. is that our culture is only a couple hundred years old. Where cultures that some are thousands of years old. There's so much more. They're interesting. They're so rich and so diverse and so opens up your mind to see different things and see different people. And that's a whole different world that I would like to open the doors to and experience.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And it was a pleasure talking to you about so many things. And we hope to chat soon again and see you in India in person sometime soon.
Yeah, so we're working something out with Paul. We previously talked about you and Paul coming down to India. So maybe in 2017 we can make that happen.
Yeah, let's do it. I like Paul. I like hanging out with him. So we'll have to all make the trip down there and I'll get to check it out.
Great.
All right, fantastic.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Have a good day, sir. Thank you.
And we're back. Great conversation with Frank Mir, Akhilesh.
Yeah, so as you said, he's very articulate. The guy he has the innate ability to just have those conversations, which you look at a lot of fighters and you don't think that they are that articulate. So Frank is one of those guys that can talk about not just fight sports, just about anything and everything for hours. So yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, and, he seems like the kind of guy you can just sit and have a beer with and chat MMA and UFC like all night long,
Yes. Right, as I said, you don't see a lot of
experience, a lot of knowledge, coming from him, and he seems to have a very level-headed perspective about everything.
Yeah, so there are fighters, for example, that love breaking down the fights, analyzing, and being scientific about it. And Frank is one of those people.
Yeah.
So inherently, all these people love the sport, but just what you do outside the cage and how you look at things. For example, just the fact that Frank is a student as well as a teacher kind of emphasizes on how prominent, how good he is, or how good of an understanding he has, not just inside the cage but outside of it. So he's very analytical. He's very articulate, as you said. So it's having a conversation with someone like him who has nearly 2 decades of experience in the sport was phenomenal.
Yep. Well, we hope to talk to him again soon. Let's move on to UFC Halifax, which happened India time Monday morning. You want to first talk about Carla Esparza? There was some controversy there. You want to explain to the viewers?
Sure. So, even during the preview, we talked about the history between Carla and Randa going back to their TUF days. So since then, Carla Esparza. So looking at Carla Esparza, you won't think that she is who she is. I mean, she is very outspoken. Let's put it that way. She has taken to Twitter to bash a lot of fighters, although she has turned down fights before, like for example with Claudia Gadelha before. So Randa is one of those people that Carla has never got along with, and she has kind of had some harsh words for her over the years on social media. And their fight was so important because Carla is a former champion. She was coming back after a decisive loss against Joanna. Yeah, she did win her last fight, but it wasn't that great. So a lot of momentum, a lot of what's in store for the future in the division kind of rested on this fight. If Carla had a decisive victory over someone like Randa Marcos, who, as we previously discussed, might not be a top 5 fighter, but is a floater between top 5 and 15, she's always going to be there. So with a decisive victory, you could have seen Carla going up against a top 5 fighter, probably the winner of, say, Rose Namajunas and Michelle Waterson. But the fight itself was pretty good, because just to start things off, I thought Randa Marcos was very defensive. She had her hands down. She was trying to posture herself, lower her center of gravity just to make sure that Carla doesn't get takedowns. She was being very defensive. She was trying to make sure that Carla did not have the ability to shoot in. But Carla was phenomenal in striking. I know I saw a vast improvement in her striking. She had some good combinations and kept landing on Randa. But going into the second and third rounds, Randa grew more in confidence. She had her hands up. She was very solid defensively, and as we discussed, she has a very good offensive grappler. So she did manage to control the fight when it went to the ground eventually. So, in the end, Randa won the fight by split decision. And after the fight, Randa laid into Carla, saying she is a bully. As I said, by looking at Carla Esparza and knowing her, you wouldn't think that she is a bully, but the words that she used against Randa and some of the fighters might indicate that she can be. So after the fight, Randa just laid into Carla, saying, this is what happens when you bully someone. You never bully people, this and that. So it was a fun night. You had 2 promos that actually got people talking. One is Randa's, and the other, of course, is Lewis's. But we'll come to that in a while.
Yeah, that was pretty interesting. We'll get to that when we reach that fight. So now I want to talk about this young fighter, Canadian fighter, Gavin Tucker, who won his bout with, what was his opponent's name? It was like,
Cecilia.
Sorry?
Cecilia?
Yeah, Cecilia. Now, I thought this guy was in the mold, the way his fighting style, of course, the new breed of MMA fighters, like a Cub Swanson, Rodriguez style. Very all-rounded fighter, fast, very good with his skills, distance, can hit you from anywhere. What's amazing was, and this is what I want to talk about actually, is that he's come from this little town, of 60 people. He said there's only 60 people left. And his mom, who had accompanied him and actually left the island, they're from an island of 60 people, had never left the island before then. First time she's gotten off the island for this fight. Never seen a rock concert, never gone anywhere, never been off the island. The first time she's come off the island and seen his fight. So he was talking about going back and calming her down, because he was saying, this all must be too much for her. So I thought that was amazing that a guy with so much skill has come off of this island, with just 60 people. It shows that in the world of MMA, that if you put your mind and heart to it, you can achieve anything, what you want to do. It doesn't matter where you come from.
Right, and Tucker, from what I remember, had a perfect 9-0-0 record on the local promotions. A lot of people actually wanted to see how this kid would do in his first UFC fight because there was a lot of momentum. I think in his last fight he knocked someone out in the opening minute or so. So he was coming to the UFC with a lot of hype behind him.
Yeah.
And he was also a local kid from Canada, so that was the other interest. But a lot of people expected or wanted to see how he would fare against the real tough competition, against a legitimate UFC fighter, and he, again, as you said, did very well. So just, you have a lot of fighters who come from relatively unknown paths but make it big. You have your rags to riches kind of stories as well. Even someone like Diaz, for example, he came from a neighborhood where people either kill or get killed.
Yeah, he came from a gang background, basically.
Right. So, mixed martial arts has given opportunities to all of these guys to live that kind of a life and, use all of that inside the cage, the aggression, the frustration, the history, everything. So, he's again one of those feel good stories, and I would be very interested to see how he would fare in the division, or how far he would actually go. Has a lot of promise. Again, in the local promotions, fared exceedingly well. Did very well in his first fight. Difficult to analyze anything from just one fight in the UFC, but from what we have seen, it all indicates that he has a good future.
Yeah. Now, we wish him all the best, of course, in the featherweight division. I think he's got a lot of promise, and I would be excited to see his next fight. Let's move on to the co-main event of the evening: Johnny Hendricks, Hector Lombard. Of course, a lot of anticipation on this fight because of Hendricks also moving up to middleweight, and he seemed very happy about it. He said this is the first time he really felt energized, which is surprising because he's an ex-champ as well. He has in the past, like we spoke about, managed to cut weight and win the belt as well. So, but of course, not able to do that very successfully. He was on a 3-fight losing streak. The last one, of course, a little dubious of whether he did lose it, but that's how it is. Law of averages. You win some, you lose some. But I've always wanted to watch Hendricks because you never know when he's going to pull out something special. The same thing with Hector Lombard. He has that capacity to just be electrifying at times. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to in this fight. Johnny Hendricks' camp seemed to have a really good plan for him. I could hear the corner man, his coach, rather always saying to the left, going away from his strong hand and not allowing Hector, to swing or get into the pocket with Hendricks. So I think Hendricks played a really smart game, and they both, of course, were still fresh for the third round. And right. I think it was Hendricks' strategy and game plan which got him the win at the end of the day.
Right. So, this is something that we even touched upon, where we said it would be interesting to see how Hendricks would fare at 185 when he doesn't have so much weight to cut and then rehydrate, or get some of that weight back. The thing that puzzles me is Hendricks, even before. So there was a photo that again surfaced just hours before the weigh-ins where Hendricks once again looked pretty bad. I mean, how much weight is he putting on and how much weight is he cutting is something that I think we need to pay attention to. So, when during his last fight, right? So there were a couple of media members that said, is it really that difficult for you to cut weight to 170? Then Hendricks challenged them saying, okay, I'll give you 2 to 3 months where you have to cut 25 pounds. Let's see you do it. And these guys actually did it. So, and Hendricks has since said, you know what? He has been critical of the media as well. Switch off your cell phones, whatever it is, blah blah blah. He's been critical of the media members. But just the fact that even during this weight cut, Hendricks looked pretty brutal going into it. I I do not know. I mean, he said he used to walk at 200. He put blame on red meat. He did all of that. He moved up to 185. He doesn't have to cut 13 extra pounds. Sorry, 15 extra pounds. But he still looked bad. So it's all about weight management. It's all about being professional for Johnny at this point. But again, going to the fight, as I said, it's a very interesting clash of styles because you have a primary wrestler who has that one punch knockout power in Johnny Hendricks going up against someone like Hector Lombard, who's again a really really good wrestler, but has that brutal power. And we even talked about how Lombard almost finished his previous two fights against Dan Henderson and Neil Magny, but at the end of the day lost just because he could not finish them when he had the opportunity. So I primarily wanted to see how Johnny would fare against someone that nullifies his wrestling, against Hector Lombard, who faces someone who has that big one punch knockout power. Primarily, Hendricks, when he used to fight at 170, might not have that much energy, as he even said at 185. He said, "I feel like I have more energy fighting at 185." So it was kind of even Stevens going into the fight, and after the second round, it was even Stevens once again, and even deep into the third, you could feel that it was even Stevens. First round, Johnny Hendricks took it, then it was first round Lombard took it, then it was Johnny. And the interesting part is Johnny went for 2 takedowns, completed 0, where you had someone like Hector who went for 10 takedowns and completed 2. And it was Hector Lombard who once again used his size advantage, used his strength to control the fight in the clinches, to be in the more dominant position. But now with the rules changing, that translates to nothing, as we have seen even during the Holly Holm and De Randamie fight. So it was even Stevens. These guys were landing good combinations. Hendricks was tagging Lombard. Lombard was getting Hendricks in those clinches and tagging him with knees. But it was deep into the third round that Hendricks really took control over the fight, and in the end, that kind of turned the fight in his favor. So, not the kind of fight that I probably would have expected from Hendricks moving up to 185, knowing that he has more energy saved rather than when compared to when he was fighting at 170. But I think getting that win after his previous 3 losses was very important to Johnny. So he did what he had to get back into the win column. I wouldn't say I was very impressed with him. He wasn't like Kelvin Gastelum was against Tim Kennedy when he moved up to 185. Now that was a statement performance. Johnny was not that effective, but at the end of the day, he fought against someone who had that legitimate tag to his name in Lombard. So either ways, I think it helped Johnny. Not as emphatic, but still getting back into the win column was a necessity for him.
Yeah, now coming to the main event, Derek Lewis versus Travis Brown. A very entertaining fight. A very entertaining fight and entertaining post. But let's come to the fight first. It seemed like Travis Brown was going to run away with the fight initially because he seemed to have hurt Derek Lewis with a kick to the stomach. He was constantly attacking his legs, his body. And there was a time where Derek Lewis was trying to keep some distance, running away, keeping his distance from Travis Brown to try and recover. At that time, of course, Travis Brown didn't take full advantage of it. Derek Lewis was able to recover. Right. First round, definitely Travis Brown's. Now, in the second round, Travis Brown was still doing the same stuff. Derek Lewis was now ready for it and ready to time his punches when Travis Brown was kicking or catches, kicks, and punch. So I think Travis Brown didn't mix his game plan, which is why then Derek Lewis, was able to eventually, as we saw, finish Travis Brown on the ground. Some controversy, of course, again with the referee stoppage. Dana White also expressing his angst at a late stoppage. But coming back to the fight first, uh, I thought Derek Lewis made a really good comeback, and the whole thing in the end with Travis Brown, lying on the ground, with Derek Lewis doing the whole Black Beast thing on the ground was scary stuff, and it was. I think we some people are talking about Derek Lewis, Francis Ngannou next.
Yeah, I think that's an unfair matchup at this point because you have two contenders rising up. You don't want to end one of their momentum, so you'd want to essentially build them up to a point where, for example, if it's a title eliminator, if it's a number one contender fight, then sure, But until that happens, that probably is something that I would definitely not do. Now, talking about the fight itself. Travis had a good game plan going into the fight because we have seen in Lewis's fight against Roy Nelson where Roy Nelson kept attacking Lewis's leg, with the leg kicks, just kept chopping away at it. So Brown also had the same game plan. We talked about this. Brown would essentially want to keep his distance. He wouldn't want to close the distance or get into range with Derek because that is where Derek is at the most dangerous at. So he kept his distance using his kicks. He kept, kicking Lewis's leg or using his oblique kicks, using his kicks to keep the distance, just to make sure that he stays outside. Travis also had the reach advantage. So he primarily wanted to just stay on the outside and try to control the fight from the outside. But we saw this, once the fight went into, say, a clinch, where Derek is so dangerous. He was tagging Travis with his uppercuts, where Travis was trying to cover up, but he was leaving his guard open, and Derek was just laying into him with those uppercuts. But as you said, Travis also hurt Lewis with his kicks. He kept targeting his midsection, throwing kicks at Derek. So the first round was kind of even Stevens. I would say, as you said, it leaned more towards Travis Brown just because of his effective game plan and the manner in which he negated Derek's imposing strength, imposing character, just in those clinches or in the range where he's very dangerous. Coming to the second round, Derek, he started telegraphing Travis's kicks. Whenever Travis wanted to go for those, you could see that from Travis's stance itself. It was not wide. He was always ready to throw those kicks. So in the second round, Derek was more aware of that. He was able to catch. So the beginning of the end for Travis was when he tried to throw a kick, but Lewis caught his foot and then tagged him. Then took him into a clinch. Then we also talked about how if the fight goes to the ground, that would spell the end for Travis Brown. And that's exactly what happened. Lewis stripped him, took him to the ground, and finished him. And the emphatic way in which he did was phenomenal. He tagged him, clipped him, took him to the ground, and then just laid into him with those vicious punches. And as you said, Yamazaki was about at least 3 or 4 punches late.
Now coming to that, he has given a statement, which we'll repeat. He has apologized, in fact, for the late stoppage. He's recognized that it was late, and agreed that it was late and that he did come in late. Said, right in the moment, I already knew that I allowed 2 extra punches.
Right.
But the reaction time from a heavyweight is different than a lighter fighter. So when Lewis landed the punch where Brown went out, he was able to land 2 more before I came in to stop the fight. But for sure, I should have stopped it a little earlier. Everyone has his days and I can't give excuses. It's hard to please everyone. Yamasaki said of the debate between early and late stoppages. I try to be as consistent as possible, but sometimes you can't. I wanted to give him another chance because early in the fight he was getting knocked out standing and he said, I'm fine. And I saw that he was trying to defend himself, so I let him continue, and on the ground it went a little longer. I'm sure that Brown likes that we let the fight go on a little longer, so he has a chance to come back, he continued. No fighter likes early stoppages, but it happens. There's no excuse. I know I should have stopped it earlier, but it was so fast I couldn't stop it.
Good defense. But you could see during the barrage of punches that Derek was throwing at Travis, Yamazaki was right on top of the action. It wasn't like he was, some distance away, took time to come in between and stop the fight. It wasn't like that. He was right on top of the action. He was just beside Travis. He was standing north to Travis and just looking down at what was happening. So if he wanted to stop the fight, it would have been much easier. You just have to get in between both the fighters, and he was right on top, so it won't take him that much time to stop the action. I think
Right?
primarily.
Do you think he
it
was
Yamazaki.
because this is Travis Brown and he's come back from
Right,
worse
so I think that
situations?
was the case because even, as Yamazaki said during the first round where Derek was clipping Travis in the clinch, Travis wobbled, but he went back and he told Yamazaki, "I'm fine." So, he said that, and then the fight continued. So I think there was a little hesitation on Yamazaki's part as to know exactly when to stop the fight. But you could see after Brown clipped, Travis, and he went to the ground, you could see after the second punch, Travis was done. He wasn't defending himself. He just had his hands up. And if you're not, see, we even talked about this before. I think when to stop a fight is crystal clear. The moment a fighter stops defending himself or herself intelligently, that is when you need to step in. That is what the rule says. I think it's pretty objective. You could see at that point that Travis was not defending himself intelligently. So after the second punch, I thought Yamazaki should have stepped in, and just because it's Derek Lewis that's throwing those punches. After the third, fourth, and fifth, you saw Travis just going out, and then Yamazaki coming in, which again, is very questionable. He can say, "Hey, so it was not my night." But and now here's the thing. Now Yamasaki will be held accountable because there is accountability in United States because of the athletic commissions, because of the state oversight. Maybe, that's the thing. Let me just say
That's
that.
that's
the
a
thing.
different chapter.
Yeah.
So let's come to Derek Lewis's post-fight comments, which I was like, he was talking, and I was like, is he actually saying this stuff? Of course,
Yeah.
because he was asked by Brian Sand why he was holding his stomach, and he said, I had to go for a number two. It didn't hit me that hard. लेकिन मुझे basically ये संडास जाना था, मुझे बाथरूम लग गई, मेरे पेट पकड़ लिया. that was too funny. And then of course he said, I've been training too much, I've been having sex too much, so I need a break. Which again, I was like, I don't think anybody else has said that so far, but it was interesting and entertaining. And then of course he I don't know if you want to call it leveled allegations or brought up past allegations of Travis Brown accusations of domestic abuse, which he was cleared from, but he said that this guy likes to put his hands on women, and so I'm glad that Yamazaki let me get in a couple and stopped it late and let me get in those couple of extra punches. And then of course he wanted to know where Ronda Rousey's behind is, for lack of a better, more polite term. I don't know. I'm a bit in two minds about how personal fighters should get. Especially see, before a fight, they're trying to get into some people's heads, and after a fight, it's all respect. But here it was the other way around, kind of. A lot of stuff was said in the post-fight cage interview, and even afterwards.
Right, and I think this is the notion that people have about Ronda Rousey and Travis Brown at this point. They're very maligned. After Ronda's loss, you saw people making fun of her. After Brown's loss, you see people making fun of Travis. So, I cannot talk on behalf of Derek or what is right, just because of what happened in the past, because that is something that happened out of the cage.
Yeah.
You cannot take that inside the cage, as far as I'm concerned. Late stoppage is a late stoppage, and this is where I say an early stoppage is much better than a late stoppage. A premature stoppage is much better because essentially you're trying to save or trying to kind of look after the fighter's well-being But here, taking those 2 or 3 punches, that actually leads up. It adds up as you move forward, even as a fighter, as a person, when you're aging. So I necessarily would not agree with Derek regarding what he said. And he said, I'm happy because the fight was not stopped and I got the chance to
No,
kind of
we're
land
not agreeing
more.
with him at all. We're just stating what he said.
Right. So I'm saying I don't agree with him
Yeah.
personally, but Derek. Okay. So this is where I say Derek is probably one of the most entertaining fighters in the heavyweight division at this point. Stipe, entertaining, but who else is there that's marketable for you? You don't have anyone else, other than maybe Overeem when he is being Overeem.
Are you talking about entertaining as a fighter or because of what they say?
Both.
Because
Both.
Francis Ngannou, I feel, has the. You don't think he has the capability of being entertaining inside the cage, or rather brute force?
He is a brute force, but so here's the thing: Ngannou does his job. He goes inside the cage, he finishes the job, comes out. Derek Lewis goes inside, and even leading up to the fights, he is very entertaining, both as a fighter and as a spokesperson for his fights. I think UFC fighters, at least now, understand the importance of trash talk and the art of it. In the heavyweight division, you do not have anyone at this point who is as articulate as maybe not articulate, but as entertaining as Derek Lewis. So I think that's a good thing going forward for the heavyweight division. As you said, putting Derek Lewis and Francis Ngannou is a fight that a lot of people want to say at this point, but I do not necessarily agree with it. I think if push comes to shove, that should be a title eliminator or something that should be saved for 1 or 2 more years just to build these guys.
So basically, they should have another fight each before being like a number 1 contender fight.
Right. I mean, before this fight, Lewis was ranked number 8. Pretty sure he'll move up to about 6 or 5. And Ngannou, again, one of the top 10 fighters. So that is a fight I feel, you cannot put it together right now because these two are the only 2 heavyweights that really broke out in the past couple of years. Otherwise, you have the same, the Cain Velasquez, the Verdooms, the Alistair Overeems who have been there for years now. So maybe one more fight. Ngannou, the way he destroyed Andrei Arlovski, warrants a top 5 guy now. And the same with Lewis. Once they both have one more victory, I think that is when you can build it up and go for a title eliminator fight. I think that is the most sensible thing to do at this point.
Yeah. Well, we would look forward to whoever Derek Lewis or Francis Ngannou fights next, and the whole heavyweight division. I think it's starting to get a little more exciting rather than just the 3-4 horse race it used to be. I think there's a lot more exciting talent, which these guys have brought in. And like Frank Mir said, heavyweights mature much later in life than some of the other weight classes, after 35. That's why we see these guys coming on the picture now.
Exactly. And, they have at least a few more years left in the UFC. So you need to make sure that you do not kill the momentum off at this point. Putting Derek against Ngannou might make for an excellent fight stylistically, but you have, again, a chance where they both throw haymakers in the very first round and someone gets knocked out. So you're just halting someone's momentum at this point. So just give them one more fight each and then just let them fight for the title eliminator.
Yeah, well, that was UFC Halifax. We're going to take a short break and come right back. And we're back, and this Saturday we have the culmination of the Super Fight League, which has been going on for some weeks now. We have in the finals Delhi Heroes versus Sher Punjab as the 2 finalist teams. I think there's some exciting talent in both teams. There is some exciting talent, more than some. There is a lot of exciting talent in the losing semi-finalists who are fighting for the 3rd and 4th spot on Friday evening. Goa Pirates and Bengaluru Tigers, right? It's Bengaluru Tigers in the semi-finals. We will be trying to contact some of the players to see how they're gearing up for the finals. And for them, it's a big moment. It's the first time the Super Fight League has come in a league format, and basically how they've been training and how they're looking forward to the finals and their strategy as such. So we're going to try reaching out to some of them and see who we can get on board to bring you some SFL action and talk about the players in the final and see what happens at the final and cover it after the final as well. Give you a post-fight analysis of the SFL finals and third and fourth place. So that's it from me and Akhilesh for now. We will get back to you very soon. Before that, I would just like to say to the person or persons who are commenting on our Facebook trying to threaten us, don't waste your time and don't waste our time. We don't give in to threats. We don't give in to intimidation. We will still say what we think is right. Save your own time when you guys say, don't be on Facebook and blah, 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 all the rest of that. Don't waste our time with your empty threats, okay? No one is intimidated by that shit, okay? Thank you all viewers for tuning in. Goodbye.